Oh, hello, you salty old sea dogs. It's been a little while since we've last worked on the Kitbashed Swamperial Guard army, but I've been feeling the itch recently, meaning it is officially swamping time. That or I have some kind of disease or skin condition.
Swamp Rip. Miniatures.
Now the army so far has a bit of a mixture of vehicles, lighter infantry and some heavier weapons teams, but one thing it's sorely missing is the presence of some big old chunky boys that can both soak up damage and also bash your brains in. Luckily for me, such a unit already exists in the ranks of the Astra Militarum in the form of these bulky bullgryn boys. These hefty mother lovers come in groups of 3 per unit, and for my first 2 builds I'm going to be using some ogres from the appropriately named Ogre Blood Bowl team because they're equally hefty and the box comes with a bunch of green boys in, so I feel like they're very kind of green boy adjacent at least and should fit in with the rest of the army quite nicely. One of the things that really draws me to bullgryns, other than those fancy little mustaches, is the impressive slab shields they can be equipped with. These things give a huge bonus to their survivability and tankiness when on the tabletop, and also the alternatives are these actually stupid looking brute shields, so needless to say, I'm starting my slabs off with some plasticard that I gently infuse with some texture using my Dremel. This texture will help the plasticard base layer look a bit better if we end up with any visible gaps later on, but for now it was time to start bulking these slabs out using these pieces from the Snotling pump wagon. The idea for these shields as always is to get a blend of salvaged Imperial Guard gear with the usual makeshift swampy materials thrown in for good measure. So for the first guy I've added these miscellaneous armor plates and pieces from God knows where, used some little plasticard trimmings to extend these metal bands and hold everything together, and shoved on this leftover Aquila thing to pump up the Cadian factor to around a sort of 7.5 on the Richter scale. For the second slab I chopped away some of that pump wagon piece I'd added a moment ago, which allowed me to add on this piece of heavy bolter. I'd bent this slightly to fit the curved profile of the shield, and once it was on I used a blob of green stuff to add some more metal plating, then filled in the empty spot using some matchsticks and another fun little branchy detail. After that I attached this small section of plating stuff down on the remaining bald spot and used my trusty multi-purpose sandwich bag ties to add the necessary metal banding that holds everything together. I was relatively happy with the general size and bulkiness of the shields at this point, although I did make a few smaller additions later. For now though, my next port of call was to chuck on a couple of obligatory green boys. I've used this little bad boy in a couple of my builds for this army now because he's just in the perfect pose to ride something into battle, and again after adding a small platform piece at the back to rest his sweet little butt cheeks on, he fits perfectly into place on top of the helmet and was ready to cause an absolute ruckus. This second one was a bit more tricky though, because although I liked the pose and it kind of fit well with the shield, it would have made the overall miniature hang off the side of the base much more than I'm comfortable with. You can see here in the sophisticated demonstration how far off the edge of the base he actually is, and that's the kind of shit that keeps me up at night. So to combat this I've implemented a fancy 2-stage plan where I basically just cut off a chunk of the shield and swapped the frying pan arm for a much more complementary one. He was still a very wide boy at this point, you know, only fractionally less wide than the gap between my sister's 2 front teeth, but in the same way my family has just about grown to tolerate her, I think I can just about tolerate this. Next up I wanted to increase the tankiness of our bullgryns just a little bit further, which I did by slapping on some extra armoured pieces I'd salvaged from various Imperial Guards and Green Boy kits. Of course these extra bits of protection need to be held in place by something more tangible than hopes and dreams, so I used this weird twine stuff with some super glue to create some makeshift straps for them. I mainly did this because I couldn't be bothered to make them using green stuff, and in the end they seem to work fairly well, so I'll probably be using this technique again in the future. Now, let's talk about something that has gone completely ignored up to this point, which is the fact that this ogre is wielding one of our beloved green boys like he's about to fling it across the battlefield. At Swamp Rat Miniatures Incorporated, we are pro green boy, and although it pains us to see one of our humble brethren treated with such disdain, it's also just kind of funny. So we have voted to allow it on this occasion, and by we, I mean me, because
I'm all alone. There's no one here beside me.
As I mentioned earlier, I plan to run these bullgryns with a melee loadout, so I felt I should at least attach a melee weapon to each one, regardless of whether they're actually wielding it. This open hand on my second boy felt like an invitation to add something a bit more spicy, so I shoved on this random bomb thing, which kind of reminded me of those super mutant S words you can't say on YouTube from Fallout 4. Coming back to our wide boy, there was something that felt slightly off about him. I felt that the shoulder area up top here needed an extra little something to kind of round off the silhouette, and I ended up choosing a big old dirty, disgusting spider for this because it felt kind of thematic. And with that, our first two boys were finished. They were looking pretty good overall. This guy's super wide, obviously, you know, he's deep in Moto territory now. And wider than the spread of your mum's legs on the night you were conceived. But yeah, overall, pretty happy with them. Those of you with a keen power of recollection will recall that earlier I said these bad boys come in units of 3, and for our third bullgryn substitute, I'll be using this fancy little troll fella from the Bourget's Beast Grabbers box, just to give our unit a bit more variety. And the thing that really drew me in was this pelt up top, which I had initially thought was a rat, but have since realised is in fact a wolf pelt. And a wolf pelt doesn't make too much thematic sense in this army, whilst the big old dirty rat pelt does, because we are swamp rats after all, so I decided to try my hand at removing some of the more lupine features and sculpting in some more rodent ones instead. I was a bit overzealous in my wolf removal methods, creating some holes in it because these Warhammer Underworld miniatures are hollow like Easter eggs, but I filled those in quite easily with some green stuff. I used a bit more green stuff to give this pelt some more rat-like qualities, giving it some larger, rounder ears and a kind of slightly more bulbous snout, which definitely helped. Then I finished it off by adding some pretty hefty rat chompers up front and a nice little wiggly worm tail out the back. It's kind of hard to see at the moment because of all the green on green action, but this was definitely looking a bit more rat-like at this point, so I was happy enough to continue. Like the other two boys, the shield will be the main attraction on this troll, and I had an idea to use this Blood Bowl token as part of it, as I love its angry little pot of greed face, and I'll probably never use it for anything else if not. To get this bad boy started, I chopped off around the edges to kind of square it off slightly, and then dremeled a fair bit of the bulk away from the back, as the tokens are quite thick, and I want it to lay a bit flatter on the base layer. And for that base layer, I just added some more random Imperial Guard and Green Boy odds and ends to a piece of plasticard, using some blobs of green stuff as extra cushion for the pushing. Adding the Blood Bowl token into place as the final piece was really satisfying, and the completed shield was definitely reminding me of a hybrid of the Dragonfire shield from RuneScape and a Pot of Greed from Yu-Gi-Oh! But the way our troll's hand was positioned at this point would have had it sticking out a lot further than I wanted, so of course some more delicate adjustments were required, which allowed me to add the shield much closer to the body. So once that was situated, I just made a couple more small armoured additions to our little trolly moly with some more straps to hold them into place. But I didn't want to go too far with these, as I wanted his hunched up body to still be visible, since it's kind of like looking into a mirror for me. This guy's already equipped with a melee weapon, and at this point in the build I couldn't really be bothered to change it up much anyway, so I just made a few holes in it, which I used to insert some spiky little styrene rods to help it feel just that little bit more crude and brutal. And boom, there we go. Not really a huge change up from his original form, but he looked pretty good now with his Pot of Greed shield and his fancy new rat pelt, which meant that our trio of bulky boys were now completely finished, and it was time to slap some paint onto them. Lovingly. I made a start with my troll first, and I wasn't really sure how I wanted to paint him up when I started, but I did have a nice wine red colour I wanted to use, so I gave him a healthy base coating of that, then proceeded to basically cover it up entirely using a selection of purple and pinky layers on top. I made sure to give him a slightly lighter coloured belly to help with a bit of variety, and then at one point I went completely rogue and painted the whole head purple for basically no reason. I think I was just a bit dehydrated at this point, as the temperature in the UK had reached 1,000 degrees recently. Luckily though, just like my butt, I was able to put that behind me and sort of spent ages making the head look just like it did before I ruined it, and then carried on adding some slightly iffy highlights and whatnot to the rest of the troll. In the end, I think it looked sort of worse than it did approximately halfway through the paint job, and it was definitely a bit pinker than I wanted, but yeah. Moving on. The ogre skin was also a bit of a mare to paint, as the majority of it was tucked away in hard to reach spots, but I ended up doing a fairly humanoid kind of peachy colour with a tinge of necrotic flesh mixed in to make it look slightly more gnarly. I then spent a good portion of time painting up the rat pelt on top using a variety of brown colours to try and get a nice furry appearance, which was a good use of time because I ended up changing it completely later on, but it wasn't all bad I suppose because I did keep the little wiggly worm tail and fleshy bits around the ears and nose in place. I also painted in the eyes for some reason, which I'm now questioning the validity of, considering that it's supposed to be a dead rat pelt, you know? How long do eyeballs last before decomposing? Can we get a scientist on the case, please? But anyway, after the great rat pelt debacle of 2025, I started painting in some of the more boring and regular details that we've painted time and again throughout this army build, with a nice new vibrant purple colour that I've forgotten the name of being used on some of the armour pieces in line with our overall colour scheme. Some gnarly old rusty, corroded metallic sections wherever necessary, small bit of pizzazzification on the straps I'd added earlier, and whatever colours felt right for the remaining little miscellaneous details. The shields got basically the same kind of base coat as the rest of the builds did, starting with that nice purple colour, following it up with a bit of contrast paint for the wood, and a mixture of a dark metallic and a regular old brown paint to make the metallic areas look quite old and battered up. I splashed some washes around next to add some really easy depth and shadows as I was feeling a bit lazy, and then I began my efforts to make everything look just a little bit nicer. For the wood, that meant using a variety of brown colours to add some wood grain effect and a very thin glaze of a dark green colour to help it look a bit more damp and swampy. For the metallics, to keep with the theme of me being a lazy toad, I just gave them a good serving of dirty down rust, which I kept stippling away at as it dried to give it a slightly more rugged and interesting patina. For the purple sections, I started with some easy edge highlights, and then to match with the process I used for painting some of the bulkier gear in this army, I covered it in a ton of little scratchy, splotchy brush strokes too. This looks weird now, but once I add a bit of streaking grime and wick away the excess, it makes a bit more sense and provides a nice patina I could top up using a touch more purple. For the ogre boys, I hit the last small details like this tassely bit and this creepy little spider, and they were good to go. Our hybrid RuneScape / Pot of Greed shield though needed a bit more attention, and to keep it on theme with the army I decided to use a nice bold brighter green colour against a darker red in his mouth, basically using the same colours I do for the smaller green boys. In the end I felt like the edges of the Blood Bowl token maybe could have been blended into the other shield details a bit better as they stuck out a bit now, but in terms of the colours at least I was really happy and loved this unique little addition to the army. At this point it was time for our green boys, which I painted in using our regular kind of colour scheme, just doing what I can to make those cheeky little shits look nice and vibrant, and the very final detail was the horrible, disgusting spider on the shoulder of our thick boy. The paint job was now basically complete, except I felt there was too much brown going on that was kind of blending together with the rusty armour, the straps, the rat and whatever else, so I began a final editing stage here where I repainted the rat using a more grey colour scheme that seemed to work a lot better, glazed some black over the straps to darken those down a lot, and used the worst brush possible to add some little scratchy metallic highlights. These helped to define the edges of the grungy armour pieces a lot better, and I also used a bit on the purple sections of the shield just for that extra razzle dazzle. I then finished the miniatures off completely with some simple swampy basing, and they were finally ready to join the ranks of the Swamperial Guard. So there we have it, my friends, the latest addition to our army, and like I said at the beginning, it's been a little while since I've worked on it, so it's good to be back in the murky depths of the swamp once again, and we'll be returning to it very soon. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe or leave a like or a comment. Let me know what your favourites and least favourite parts of the build are, and let me know how likely you think it is that I actually saw an alien spaceship when I was like 8 years old, because I genuinely can't tell if it was real or just a really vivid dream. But yeah, either way, I'll be back soon, and for now, as always, I have been your friendly neighbourhood swamp rat, and I will see you very soon. in another video. See ya!